You're listening to Permission to Shine, the podcast. Stories of overcoming obstacles and finding self-empowerment with Sharice Bisram, Inner Power Activation Leader. The Oxford Dictionary describes permission as the action of officially allowing someone to do a particular thing, consent, authorization. What if you were that someone and you gave yourself the permission to be everything you wanted to be and more? No more playing small and accepting less than. You are worthy of the life of your dreams, regardless of what it is that you've been through. And honestly, it's exactly what you've been through that has shaped you into the version of yourself that you are now. Like a diamond, you've endured so much, but instead of breaking, you have become stronger and brighter. And if that's not a reason to shine, then I don't know what is. And if nature can do it, then why the hell can't you? You are brave, you are strong, you are powerful, and you are enough. Hear my call and give yourself the permission to shine, because you don't realise how many people are inspired by your light. Hey everyone, and welcome back. I'm so excited to welcome an incredible artist that shares some really beautiful values that I have, and it's so lovely that I always say, like, your vibe attracts your tribe. And I'm really finding that with the guests that I'm having on the podcast at the moment, and I think that everyone is bringing such a unique twist on the real essence of why I started this podcast and why it's so important. So I'm really excited to introduce to you Liana.
Hello, such an honor to be on such an amazing podcast. I really love the whole vibe of it, and I'm excited to have this conversation. So thank you for having me.
No, thank you. I would love for you to kind of explain about your music for anyone that hasn't heard from you yet, because they will. I know they will for sure. So if you just kind of tell us about what type of artist you are, just to kind of introduce that to people, and then we'll kind of dig into your story a little bit as we move on.
Yeah, sure. So I come from a drama school background. So I've been trained in a lot of different art forms, but specifically acting. And then I've had a long history with illness, and I've always used frequencies and other modalities to help me. And basically, I just realized that I also it's kind of have to pull all the strings together, but I have had a long history with environmental work. And I came to this turning point where I realized people weren't going to care about the environment or people that were struggling upon the planet unless they were able to actually lift themselves up out of their own pain and turmoil, which then made me fascinated in making an album that could help this, just something that you could listen to. And basically, the album in itself can be listened to the full way through. It moves through each of the energetic chakra points in the body using solfeggio frequencies that are linked to those chakras. But you can also choose a single, like feeling heartbroken, listen to Anam Cara. And the aim also, rather than having, because I love spiritual music, but I wanted the music itself to sound different, something that you could listen to before you go out or before you headed to work, that had a different point for the, amazing stuff that I listen to now, like Miracle Tones and other great bands out there that are doing that. I wanted to have kind of different genre exploration of that type of music.
Yes, I love it. And I'm really looking forward to listening to your album, because I find I know I talk to a lot of my listeners about rituals, and one of my rituals on a Sunday is to have a bath. Now, I shower every day, by the way. I'm not saying I don't bath until Sunday, but I like to just put some sound frequencies on and put it against the bath. So the bath picks up the frequency of the music that I'm playing. So like the healing energy or whatever it is that I want to amplify. And even when I'm getting ready sometimes, especially now as we embark on Scorpio season and we're going to go to the depths of the underworld and like meet our shadow again, sound frequencies for me is just like that subliminal thing that I can put on in the background that I know is going to make me feel good. Because don't get me wrong, like, I'm a hair in a bun, listen to rap music type of gal, but I equally want to feel mellow, chilled, and connected. So I feel like this album's going to be really, really amazing for all of what you said, because if you can listen to it when you're getting ready to go out, which, like you mentioned, some of the other artists, I definitely do that, and they're mixed into my playlist. So we might go to rap, and then we might go to listen to your energy in your body, and that is just my vibe completely. So I love all of that. But for anyone that doesn't know, I'd love for you to explain the benefits on the body. So you mentioned the chakras already, but I'd love for you to kind of yeah, connect that a little bit more as to why that's so important and why you chose to embed that in. Maybe let's go through your story, however you'd love to lace that in.
Yeah, sure. Basically, it's interesting because this is a point where you get separate viewpoints on the impact of sophrasia frequencies. It has a little bit of that similar energetic to the placebo effect, where they've been able to study what they do, and in a lot of the studies, they find that it relaxes you and it puts you into basically a state that allows for deeper healing. But a lot of the scientific studies don't want to say it causes that healing. In my view, because like I've been meditating since I was a teenager, many decades ago. And that was known as like absolute poppycock at the point that that was happening. And then they started to do more and more tests and find different ways to test, and then found that all these areas of the brain were activated. And I think it's going to be a similar thing for sophrasia frequencies. They have been around since the 16th century. They were only linked in modern times recently to chakra points, but obviously that Vedic modality and system has been around for thousands of years. And I trust Ayurveda and the Vedic texts a lot, in my own experience, have helped me. So it's one of those things that you get very deferring opinions on. I think that the reason I got into it was that I'd had so much help from sophrasia frequencies, and I found that if I listened to them in a state of anxiety, if I listened to them, if I was really sad, any of those things, they'd often allow me to open up and release what was trapped rather than pushing it down, which I had done for many, many years. Just keep going on, keep trucking on, as so many of us have been taught to do. And so when I look at the scientific results of it, a lot of it is talking about causing these states that allow for deeper healing. I also think on an esoteric level, it opens up and allows us to work through things like karma or blockages and things that are obstacles even from our own thinking mind. So basically, it's funny that you said ritual before, because I wanted the album itself to be like a ritual where you could drop in from the start, and because they're moving from the lower section of the body upwards, a lot of the lower section is to do with physicality, release it through dance. I mean, the benefits of releasing physically. And so what I wanted it to do was that you would start the album, the first few songs encourage you to move anything that's trapped in your body. And as the album continues, you then can move into a state after dancing of relaxation, like you would in a yoga class. Um, and so that was basically what I wanted it to be, was that you would also be able to make it an intentional ceremony. So you can set this, the record that's coming out later has instructions of how to make it a ritual. And it's all about intention, like it doesn't have to be that you move every item of furniture in your room to accommodate, but it's like nesting in some pillows, lighting a candle, and just putting an intention to what you want to achieve in that. For me, intention's the answer to everything. I think it's just the most beautiful way to connect with where you want to go in life.
Absolutely. And every when you were speaking, there was so many downloads coming through. I was like, oh my gosh, I need to say everything, but I wanted you to get to your piece there. And I absolutely agree with everything you said. And it's really funny because I was recently on a retreat in Malibu, and
Mm.
I went down to Venice Beach the last day and I was on my own, and I ended up getting into an argument with a man at a bar because he was saying that spirituality has no scientific evidence. And I said, that's in the evidence you've seen. I was like, in the research that I've done and that I do, I can see the fact that spirituality interconnects, and it's actually been here since the beginning of time. Like you mentioned, the Ayurvedic, there's so much that connects to all of this. And I think that we are ignorant to think that it's not interconnected. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's just so powerful, even down to yeah, there's certain music activates parts in the brain. And when you were mentioning about starting from the root chakra, I don't know if your intention was that that's like the feminine energy space of the kundalini rising. And
Mm.
we were speaking a lot about that at the event I was speaking at the weekend, about how the masculine energy is telling us to connect from the top chakra down, but the feminine energy is telling us to connect from the bottom up. And I think the way
Mm.
that you've done the album subconsciously, maybe that was, a subconscious intention that was there, that the divine feminine activation was.
Oh, sure. I mean,
Mm,
you've made sense of it for me in a way, because I was like, why am I doing from the bottom up? I've always been taught the other way. And it just felt right. So now you've made me feel really happy about that, that it's
Oh,
actually
good.
because we are in the era of the feminine too, you know, like we've
Mm,
entered into this age of an awakening of femininity within everything. And, you know, regardless of gender, I think it's this permission to be in a feminine state, permission to slow down. A lot of, I run a production company too, and basically meeting the demands of modern business plus what the body and the soul ask for. Because I do think you can tell how something's been created. Like when I watch something, I know if it's been an easy task to make it or a difficult task.
mm,
Marrying those two to have correct balance is such a fun dance because I want to look at a more feminine way of doing business. I don't want to lose masculinity. I have a very strong masculine side. I love good men. All those things are great, but I just have such an interest in what it looks like when we just start to do things from that different perspective. And that actually
mm,
reminded me of something you were talking about when you were saying you had that argument with that man. Whenever, because you know, like people will have a go at me for having woo-woo beliefs. And I have this like great feeling of longing in my heart of like, oh, I wish you could feel how alive the world can be when you're
mm.
actually in this state of believing in, you know, like animate objects, like trees being things that you can speak to. And it just completely shifts the way that I want to live my life as well. I suddenly see myself as custodian of this Eden that's before me. And I'm not going to lie, it's samsara we're in as well. In the Buddhist texts, we're meant to have the negative alongside the positive so we
Mhm.
can have duality and understand it. But when I'm in that state of spirituality, I just look out at the world and I'm just like, wow, it's all so magical. Like I cannot believe, and it's all free. All the best stuff is magical and free. And I think,
Absolutely.
yeah, we're really awakening back to that. And when I hear people speak like that, it's almost like it makes me think of the spectrum with which we see color through our eyes, right? We've got rods and cones, they see color and then are able to also see in the dark. But there's so much of that spectrum that we can't see with the tools we have. And that's all I think it is. I'm just like, oh, your tools just need to be turned up a little bit so you can see that. Because it's still a belief in something. You know, people that believe only in science, for me, that's another form of religious fanaticism. Oh, I don't believe in anything. That's another form of still believing and choosing to have something that defines you enough that you need to argue that other people are wrong. Like, and I think
Yeah.
it's the biggest thing with the whole journey too is like my favorite is we don't know shit. Like, I don't know what's going on, really. He doesn't know, you don't know. And it's such a beautiful equalizer that we're all just sitting here trying to figure it out too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love everything you said there because that's exactly how I feel about it. And I feel like I'd say it was an argument, it was much more of a debate. And I was really at peace with the fact that I don't need to convince anyone.
Yeah.
I'm like, cool, that's your belief. If you want to believe that, that's fine. I'm telling you my belief has shown me this. And I
Mm.
believe we're both right. And he wasn't willing to accept that. And I was like,
Yeah.
okay, that's for me when the conversation's over because I have such a mutual respect and empathy for humanity as a whole. Even, things that I don't agree with, I can see why people believe that way on all of the things. So when I meet people that don't have that equal understanding, that's just not the conversations I want to get involved in. So yeah, and it's all just so important. Like you said, the light and the darkness, all of that is so um deeply a part of the work that I do as well. And it's really lovely when I hear other people speak on it because I feel like my listeners obviously hear me say about this over and over again. So it's really lovely when I have someone else echo the same thing. And it's just, all of us that are on a mission here on this earth to do something greater than ourselves. I feel like we all have this understanding, and it's just, yeah, just
Mm.
hearing it in different ways, whether it be through music or through, a show that you watch on TV or a conversation with someone or a yoga practice. It's all the same echo, isn't it? From
Mhm.
our souls like telling us to open up and receive. And I think that for me is my understanding in my own body of what the feminine looks like is that receiving energy, because I think that for me life taught me, my experiences taught me to armor up, be in survival mode, push through. So it was only when I got to that point where I was broken open and I had to look, my soul got through the gaps basically in that moment. And I was able to go through that deep spiritual awakening. And I realized that I'd been making it hard for myself because I'd been observing the way the world was, thinking that I needed to be like that. And since I've opened up and changed my perspective, I'm now seeing beauty in everything all the time, like you mentioned. And I think that, gosh, we're so more powerful than we realize. And that's really what this podcast is about, is
Mm,
people awakening to see their true power through
yes.
all of this. And I'd love for you to kind of share with us your journey of, what your healing journey looked like, or, what led you to this place now to become the woman that you are now.
Yeah, okay. I love all of that. Thank you. It's just such a pleasure being on this podcast and speaking with you. I just wanted to say that it's such a nice
Thank
time
you.
to be able to sit and have a sweet conversation about the spirit together. Um, well, I was raised Wiccan from, I think I was in a coven from age 11, but it was something I couldn't talk about because in that tradition, obviously, for a long time, you had to have protected identities. So you weren't burnt at the stake, and those things have kind of filtered down. And there was at that point a lot of judgment towards Wicca. Like there's a lot of witches now. Um, I think that another aspect of my childhood was I grew up with all different religions around me. So I went to Bible study. I also went and learned about Buddhism. Later in life, I started learning about Taoism. And I think it was just this thirst to figure out how to deal with life when it got hard. I think that was the biggest motivator. And I think that I grew up with my mother, who was very into her Celtic lineage, and then my dad, who was very scientific, but his number one love was nature. So he almost found his spiritual connection through nature. And he was very sick from about age 12. He got my age 12, not his. He got Parkinson's and then he got emphysema and he had it for 22 years. And I think watching someone vanish with such a cruel disease was just the impetus that made me like, there has to be something more than this, because he was such a good, honorable man. He was so generous. He just upheld this amazing life, and none of it made sense to me with a lot of the things that I'd learned. And then the more that I dove into spirituality, the more I was able, he was unable to speak so easily by the end of it, but I was able to go and speak to him in meditation. And I could come back and he would acknowledge what we'd spoken about in shorter words. And so there was just suddenly so much evidence mounting in my life. I was quite rejecting originally of spirituality because my mum was there being like, come and worship the moon. And I was like, that's not cool. I'm going to go to Supre and get some lip gloss. Like that's where I was. But each time something difficult happened, it would be the thing I returned to. And then by the time I got into my 20s, I just realized it was so part of who I was, that there was this desire to explore this realm that I couldn't necessarily perceive with my eyes, but felt so powerfully. And it's always helped me. I've sat with a lot of people who are dying or about to die. And it's in those moments that I find spirituality is such a healer. And our views around death in Western society are so whacked out of where they should be. There's so much fear. There's fear of aging, fear of death, fear of anything negative. When I actually believe that in those moments we can find the most healing if we face it. Like one of my dad's friends, he got cancer and he chose to not have chemo because he'd done it once 10 years before. And he's like, you know what, I've lived a good life. I'm just going to go. And so he had a living wake, which was one of the most beautiful things I've experienced. And then he drove across Australia and decided to die where he was born. And it wasn't, it's not like the whole thing was pretty and beautiful and a Hallmark card. It was hard too. But there was something so honorable in choosing death and facing it with full courage, and also being like, oh, I'm grateful for my life. I think so many people don't get to the end of their lives and turn around and say, yeah, I can go, I've done enough. And I believe that that also is because they haven't gone for the things they want, because they fear some form of death, death of the ego, death of like a relationship, anything like that, the amount of people that hold back, holding on to stasis of something that might be ready to evolve, is often the thing that I think people regret at the end of their life when they turn around and go, I wish I'd done those things. And so I would love to see what we looked like as a society if we alleviated that fear of death. Because I've had a lot of near death moments. I've got like a genetic illness, and it caused me a lot of difficulty through my 20s. It's not as hard now. But definitely being like in a hospital and having, like alerts around it, being able to hold on to faith because I'd built that faith in myself, was so often the thing that made the point of difference, that allowed me to get through something that sometimes I'd be told you need to be on medication or you need to have this operation. I'd be like, no, I don't. I'm just going to go and figure this out with food and meditation and ancient herbs that have worked for me before. And then I would end up being cured, and the doctors would be really amazed by it. And I just think there's so much, like I was saying before, with the placebo effect, with the power of our mind that is being discovered currently. And I think it's just the next 10 years are going to be incredible with how much we realize our potentiality of our brain is, really, if
Yeah.
you want to call it brain or whatever you want to say, heart, spirit.
No, thank you so much for sharing all of that. And I feel like we have a common thread in our lives, and that is death. Like I experienced a lot of death between the ages of 12 and 17. I had 11 members of my family pass away just for various different things. And, you're something really important about, the fact your dad was such a noble man and he didn't deserve that disease. I actually had the opposite. So my dad was an alcoholic, and he was 45 when he died. And I
Mm.
had members of my family, like my nan, for example, who fought cancer twice back to back. And she was such a integral woman that, fought really hard for everything. And I was always disappointed in my dad that he tapped out because,
Yeah,
like and exactly what you said about that choice thing. And I think even then, I, I didn't get brought up in spirituality as deeply as you did, but I always had that knowing, and I could always feel energy through my hand chakras, always. And now I understand why, but back then I didn't. But I just knew that something wasn't clicking or something wasn't right. And I do now forgive my dad because I see that in my soul's journey, he did need to, be the way he was in my childhood, and he needed to pass away at that time in my life for me to become this version of me, which I understand. So there's no bad energy there at all. But at the time I was angry at him because I was like, these people have no choice, and you're choosing to put this substance within you and tap out of life when you could have fought through it. But again,
yeah,
that's my ego, presenting that opportunity. And that was obviously something our souls had made a pact for a long time ago in a universe far away. But it's just yeah, that understanding and watching, a lot of my relatives pass away very, very young. Like my cousin was 21 when she passed away, and it's just that, and it was, a sudden accident. And I think that for me, watching those people in my life pass away so early, no, only one of my relatives were 80 years old when they passed away during that time frame. Everyone was sort of 60, younger than 60. And I feel like even then I had like a lot of my family members have had connections to spirituality, and they said they were dreaming about these relatives saying about how they, wish they could have lived longer. And I always felt that as well when they were passing away. I was like, gosh, I've got to make this work now. And that was actually part of like my toxic trait, was that I have to make it because these people didn't get to. And I think
mm,
that that's almost, that was a blessing and a curse, because I now talk about this a lot in my own journey when I'm sharing my story about how that was ammunition and fuel to my fire, and the reason it pushed me forward. And I needed to go through all of that again to get to a point where I couldn't carry the weight of all of that responsibility, and that the parentalization that I'd, adopted at a young age, and all of the things, to then be able to, that armor to really buckle me to the ground, so then I could just shed it all and then
yeah.
blossom anew. That it was definitely the Phoenix moment. And I felt like I had a moment of emotion there when I was sharing that. And that's definitely the Scorpio energy, because I don't really share my story and get emotional anymore. But there must be something about our connection here that's like really shining a different light on that, which is really lovely. So thank you for holding this space as well. Um, but I think what I'm learning as well, more so in a deeper spiritual way, is that like we're all some sort of a star seed, right? And our reason to come here to Earth is to awaken the collective. And I think that what was really obvious for me this weekend was that everyone I'd spoken to that is doing this work right now has had some form of trauma to make them become the version of themselves. So even my listeners right now, if you're going for a really hard time in your life, your soul has chosen it. Okay, your soul chose for it to be hard for you, so just know that. So you need to wake up now. Okay. You need to wake up and take on that responsibility and transmute it, because this is really it, like this is the powerful space, isn't it? But I'd love to know, I mean, obviously the podcast is called Permission to Shine, and I'd love to know that moment where you really just yeah, just said, I'm not doing it like this anymore, or I'm taking my power back, or whatever that looked like for you. What would you say in your life was that moment?
I think I've had a few moments. I don't know, maybe I needed multiple sheds for some reason. I'm
Mm.
stubborn sometimes. But I think I had a lot of fear around psychedelics and other entry points into awakening. And I think I'd also been raised with a certain level of dogma, as can happen when you're raised in particular spiritual contexts, that that's the one way and there's no other way to enter these emotions and experience within higher realms. So in my mid-20s, when I'd finished at drama school, I did have a big point of awakening when I found a lot of friends who were very similar to me. And so we could actually explore questions and new ways of relating. And that also included dabbling in psychedelics, starting meditation, all those things. That was definitely a big point of opening for me, where I'd always been spiritual, but I'd kind of had this, I don't know, I would almost say there was a powerlessness to it, that I had to hand everything over completely, and kind of, if something negative was happening, just grin and bear it and take it, instead of what I believe now, which is that I really can shift and co-create with the universe and people around me. I'd seen versions of miracles happen when I was growing up, women who couldn't fall pregnant, falling pregnant, that we got in our coven, and we do whip ups, which is a way of kind of having circling energy with a chant. And we had incredible things occur from that, but there'd always been this, it was almost like I wasn't fully present in that experience or in my body. And I think that a shift that's happened now is definitely after my dad died too. That would be the second point, that I had a big awakening, because I was on the other side of the world from my whole family. I couldn't get back because it was COVID, so I couldn't enter Australia. I'd just broken up with my partner of 6 years a week before our wedding, just to make things really dramatic. And then I had all these like intense medical diagnoses, and I was living alone, running a small farm by myself. And, I think I'd always had a different view of how my dad would leave. And so him dying without me there, I was on the phone and I spent 4 hours singing to him and telling him stories while he died. So I got to be there for his final breath because of technology. But it wasn't the way that I had wanted it to be. And I was really caught up on that. And there was just this one moment when I was outside in the rain. It was like around this time of year, a bit colder. And I was trying to ground an electrical pole for a chicken fence, and I got really badly electrocuted. And I just started laughing, because it was just like, I couldn't, there was just nothing else, it was just like, what else? What else? It was almost comical. I felt like I was kind of like yelling up at the sky. I would have looked so insane to my neighbors, but I just cracked. Like that was it. And it was just this moment where like I was on my knees, I laughed, and then I was crying. And then I just realized no one was coming to save me. Like, my dad was gone. I'd have to refather myself. My mother was in grief. Everyone I knew was on the other side of the world. I couldn't even call people. And it was just this thing of like, you know what? You are the only person who's going to get you up right now and hold you. So, baby, get up. You can do it. And it was just this like marriage within myself that I think integrated my whole life's learnings in that moment of falling madly in love with myself. I think that was the biggest part of it. And that was also because I wasn't there being in love with myself like I'm the best person ever. It was I'd gone through so much of my shadow and integrated and loved and understood why I had those shadow aspects, whether it was from, trauma that had happened when I was younger or some survival technique, or, there were so many different things that fell into why I was doing some things that I didn't want to continue doing. But instead of pushing it away and like trying to run from it, I just came with open arms for those years before, so that in that moment of integration, I could really say I loved me. I loved the fact that I could be fiery. Like I wasn't suddenly being like, you're a bad person. I was being like, I understand you. And now we've got tools and ways to release things. So that fire's so fucking welcome, baby. Like bring it, let's dance. So I think that was like the integration point. I don't know. I think there's probably multiple awakenings throughout your life,
Mm.
but those two are the big ones for me, like finding community and then finding myself probably.
Yeah, I love that so much. And there's so much of your story that I just deeply resonate with. And I loved that moment where, I mean, not that you got electrocuted, but just how that all tied in together. Because it's really those moments, isn't it? I remember my family home that had been, in my life for 30 years, and I'd fallen down the stairs. And it was in that moment that and the stairs are steep, they're like that. And I fell all the way down from the top. And that was like the universe saying to me, release. And at the bottom, I cried for 20 minutes. Now, I didn't cry in front of anyone for like 10, 20 years. Like I bottled everything up. I was so toxic masculine. It was just ridiculous. So in that moment, like my mum was downstairs, my little niece that was like 2 years old, and I just sobbed for 20 minutes. And actually my mum did hold me and my niece held me, and I just was held in that space. And I just never allowed anyone to really hold me like that vulnerable, that little girl me, that was who was crying. So yeah, everything you're saying, I just feel like, yeah, I can see it as you're speaking it, and I can see it, and I wonder what the chickens were doing in that moment.
Well, they were probably laughing at me. To be fair, I would have been quite the picture. But I think that you're right. And I think that in the last few years, like the last 5 years, so many people have faced the darkest aspects of their lives or themselves. And I do think that we're finding all these ways to interconnect through these light points and have
Mm,
empathy that so wasn't there before. Like growing up with a really sick dad, people didn't understand illness. Where I was growing up, there was almost this level of like fear of it being contagious. Like I don't want to catch that bad vibe. And
mm,
I think when it's a disease that has no cure and the person starts to vanish and it was not pretty by the end of it, there's so many people that turn away from it, whereas now I think there's so much more awareness and most people have been touched by the pain
mm,
of death. Most people understand what it's like to sit in a hospital waiting for someone to hopefully wake up that might not wake up. And I think that even though it's a very difficult thing to go through, I do believe it's a benefit that we have ways to connect to each other. And for me, empathy is the thing that will cure the world.
absolutely.
I
And
think,
that's something that I teach. Yeah. Sorry, I
yeah.
didn't mean to butt in there. But yeah, I
Mm,
think that for me, I literally delivered a webinar yesterday, and the link's going to be below for anyone that's listening, didn't get to join me live, about divine feminine leadership. And for
mm,
me, like one of the core things, or two of the core things that we're speaking about right now, is vulnerability and
mm,
empathy. And I think
mm,
they are just the core pillars of what divine feminine leadership looks like, and how we're going to exactly change the world in this space. And you've mentioned it in there, and I'm always going on about tools, having these tools that we use for ourselves to help us find our way out of the darkness. And that is
mhm,
just fundamental. And every great leader or visionary that I speak to on the podcast or in person, they have some form of tools that act as a roadmap to help them find their way out the darkness. And actually a big part of that is embracing the darkness, that a lot of us we get sort of caught up in, okay, how do I get out of this now? But it's actually like, okay, this is happening, let me sit in it for a moment and for as long as I need to, and then figure
mm,
out what feels like the right thing to do, instead of just
mm,
doing it, which is obviously the masculine. So I think
mhm,
that that's so powerful. And even, the mention of community there, that's also just a fundamental part of our ancestral lineage as women, you know, like you're talking
Mm,
about the Wicca connection there for your heritage. Like that's, you know, a lot of us can trace ourselves back to some form of witchiness or some form of um dancing around a fire, you know, to bring in good energy. Like I used to deliver dance workshops, and they talk about African dance, for example, it's tribal dancing. I explain that to them there. I'm like, this is part of our innate being as humans, you know, let alone women alone. But I think that, you know, we're really going back through this shift of these practices that had been lost over time are now resurrecting, I guess, again, and we're starting to tap back into them. It's why there's been a surge in yoga and wellness and cacao
mm.
ceremonies, and you know, all of these beautiful practices are now coming back up to the surface. And I think that I just wanted to highlight that because, yeah, that's something again that I'm speaking about all the time. And it's just really important to reinforce that for people that listen that are still in that state of being lost. I think that these are ways that we've allowed ourselves to be found, right? It's just all of these.
Exactly. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, no, no, no. I was done. I was finished. I was going to pass back over to you anyway.
But
So I would love to know. Well, one, I'd love for you to explain about the Wicca in a little bit more detail because I'd not actually heard of that particular coven. So it's only when you said it was a coven that I was like, ah, okay, this is really interesting. So I'd love to know just a little bit more. And also, I'd like to know what your signs are because I'm getting some energy come through, but I don't want to say it yet, and I want to see what it is for you, like what it actually is, because I'm really good at this, but I want to know what your signs are.
oh, I'd love to know your signs as well. So the Wicca, basically, a lot of the actual Celtic practices were lost because the Romans came, and that was, a tribal society that were very oral. All the stories were kept orally. The Druids were the ones who made a lot of decisions, and they were practically wiped out. Like St. Patrick came over and chased all the serpents, which were actually the Druids. So a lot of that about St. Patrick's Day is about going and destroying Druids and the wisdom that they were holding. And I think that what happened was a man called Gardner and another one called Crowley, who I'm not as into. There's different ways to look at Wicca. I love Starhawk's perceptions. She's an amazing woman. Um, and then I also love Joseph Gardner, who is all about like practicing alone. And basically, it's just a nature-based practice. There are different takes on it, like the Crowley take and things like that, where it starts to get mixed in my opinion, with Satanism,
Yeah,
which isn't my vibe.
no,
So, and blessings to whoever's believing in whatever they want. For me, I love Wicca because it echoes a lot of the other practices that I've had the honor of witnessing. Like I've witnessed a smoking ceremony in Australia by Kukuyalanji elders, and a lot of the stuff that we were talking about even in that ceremony crossed over, which is follow the seasons.
mm,
There's 13 goals of the witch, and so like a lot of those things are like keep your words in good order, keep your thoughts in good order, meditate, honor the bee and the bird and the ocean because they're just as important as you are in this world. Eat well, treat your body like a temple. There's a breakdown of those 13 rules, and I think that they are echoed around the world in a lot of practices. And I'm grateful that we've had wisdom keepers of all different modalities that have been brave enough to hold on to those lessons and teachings and practices in the face of extreme adversity. And I also think that's why you get a lot of people who are white cherry picking from different religions and practices, because there's that hunger and that inner turmoil of knowing on a deep subconscious level that you have been, that your ties to your ancestors has been destroyed. Essentially, there's been a level of colonialism that's taken that, and then the acts that have come afterwards have been that inner colonialism within those individuals that lost the memory of what it's like knowing that the land is an extension of your body. The land is where 4,000 years of ancestors have been buried. All the babies have been birthed under that tree. We've lost all of that. So there's no permission to take from other practices and religions. I get, kind of upset about that. I look at witch talk and there's people doing like closed voodoo practices without permission. That's something I would never do. And in a lot of these modalities, you have people who read a couple of memes online and then they're like, cool, I know all about it. When really that would have been something that you were initiated as a child, those practices were taught, and you would not be stepping into those roles until you're past your crone years, like after menopause. You know, there'd be
Mm,
roles that you could play, but to be in that position, you would need to have so much life experience under your belt so that you're actually able to show up and answer those things. I think that there are also all different people that can take and lead people from all different ages. It's just something that I have noticed that people go and do one short course or dip a toe in, and then they're there saying, I know everything and I'm the person that you need to come to. Like, even though I work with chakras, I would never teach people about them. I would never be like, oh, come to me for this course, because I would also be like, well, actually, I'd much preferred to teach you about all the different Celtic trees and what they mean, because it sings in my blood, and I love learning other cultures. I just never want to like I do. I'm a Reiki master, and I have such a thing against teaching it because I'm also like, well, I'm not from that lineage. So now I'm doing a decolonizing Reiki course just so I can make sure that I'm not perpetuating anything through my blindness. And I think having no ego in that and seeing it as, an exciting thing of, oh, I get to deepen my knowledge and wisdom in this. That's so sexy. Like, when people ask me questions, I don't have to be like, oh, I don't know. I can be like, actually, that was in this specific period because of this. I think that we really want to look like, and it is that ego based. We want to look like I know what's going on and I've got it all handled. But back to that thought of, we don't know shit. And even more so, we know much less than we used to, because we're so separated from source in all those
mm.
different cultures. So yeah, I think that's just something that I love about Wicca, is that it has been recently reformulated, like in the 60s, but it does connect me as much as it can to practices that were the majority of my ancestors. Like, I'm a mongrel, I've got a bit of everywhere. And this year I've been going back to a lot of the lands that my bloodline come from, just to go and sit in those lands and kind of
Yeah.
said. And I think that that also doesn't take away from people who are connected to cultures too. I think that you can be completely connected to a culture that you don't have any bloodline, and as long as everything's being done with honor and there's appropriate ways of paying forward the knowledge you're learning, then it's wonderful. But I think that there's just this thing that happens where and it feels like it's a similar shadow of that colonialism of, I've learned this thing, now I need to own it.
Absolutely. And it's so beautiful to hear you speak on that. I really loved hearing about the Wicca in more detail because yeah, you're right. Like even for me on social media, I'm watching like people say witchy things and do witchy things. And like for me, my view and how I perceive life is from a spiritual perspective and like a vast understanding of a little bit of everything. But
Mm.
most importantly, I just go with what resonates with me. But I don't know as a person of color if I feel like there's more permission to do that because I think where you just said about the colonialism, I really know what you mean. And I
Mhm.
feel that and I see that. And I don't know if because my bloodlines are so widely spread that maybe there is a little bit more of an intersective connection, but also I have a real deep knowing of um my past lives have been for really long, like all the readings I've had and connections I've had to this, it's been like I've lived so many different lives in so many different parts of the world. And my most recent one that I had, she said to me she can't tell me where my last life was because I've lived so many. So that was a really
Wow.
beautiful thing. And how I see culture and tradition now, I would never practice anything that I don't know about or
Mm.
and I keep saying no, but I want you to know that I don't mean no. I mean have an idea about, because like you said, we don't know anything. It's just what feels right, like and
Yeah.
that's for me where I go now is like, okay, if that feels right, like for me to burn a bay leaf for a manifestation, sometimes that feels right to do, but I know that that does come from the witch tradition. So, for me, I always pay respect to whatever it is, whatever practice I'm doing. And every time I arrive somewhere, in any part of the world or land, I always say thank you for allowing me to be here. Like that's just something I always do. As soon as the plane touches the ground, I'm like, thank you for allowing me to welcome me into your space. Like always, that's just something I always do because I'm very aware of that.
Mm.
Even as a person of color, that I want to ask for permission to be in this space. And I know that this is super spiritual. We've really gone round here, but I just think that it's so important, and I love that you bring all of that up because I just think that yeah, that colonialism and actually like fragmenting like English heritage,
Mm.
that actually is a big part of it. And I feel like you just really hit a nail on the head there, and it makes so much sense. And I loved your connection to and how you explained the connection to the Celtics and the Druids and stuff. You're so knowledgeable on that, and it's really lovely to be a part of. And I just wonder, do you know what your human design is?
I'm a Manny Gen.
Yeah, I thought so. Do you know what your number is?
Um, 2 4. I'm a hermit, and then I'm also the marketplace, just for
Oh,
fun.
okay, because I'm an investigator and a leader. I think I can't remember what the actual
Oh,
terms
amazing.
are, but I have this quest for knowledge that I feel like you have, and
Yeah.
it's yeah, it's really nice to be in that space with people because I feel like we just go into like this vortex of like, tell me more about that thing. I want to know everything that you know about it, and it's just really nice. So yeah, I've really enjoyed this conversation, and yeah, tell me what your signs are, your sun, moon, and rising.
Oh, yeah. So well, in Western astrology, I'm a Taurus with a Saggy moon and Aries rising. But in Vedic astrology, which is based off the moon, so I'm actually a Scorpio moon, Pisces rising, and an Aries sun, which I was like, great. I love Aries. I just don't want to be one. Sorry if you are one. Are you
Yeah,
one?
no, no, I'm not. But
Okay.
I definitely felt that for you. So I felt that you were either Scorpio, something rising or moon,
Mm.
and or Cancer. And then I
Mm.
felt like you've got either Pisces, Sagittarius, and or Aries within that mix. So it's quite funny that
Wow.
you have. So I'm glad that that's accurate.
I'm impressed.
So I'm in Vedic astrology, which I also follow. I'm Leo Sun, Leo Rising, and
Oh,
Capricorn Moon. And
oh, I
then
love
in like Western astrology, it puts me as a Virgo rising, which I'm not.
it.
So Leo sun, Virgo rising, and then still Capricorn moon. So yeah, it's funny because there's no part of me that, well, I say no part of me that's Virgo. There obviously is some sort of essence of us in it all the chart, but when I read that, I'm like, that's just not me. Sometimes I read the breakdown and I'm like, no, no, don't resonate with that at all. But again, it's the feeling, right, of what connects, I think, more than anything. But I definitely am more connected to Vedic astrology, and I can kind of loosely read those charts. So even with my own clients, like as soon as they come in, I'm like, right, let's see what you are, so I can then help you guide you through in a way that I understand. Like for example, like earth signs like practicality, and they like to know when the things are, like the facts and figures, to see the
Mm.
growth that way. Whereas a fire sign wants to take action and know how can they do that, how can they step into their authority more in that space. And a water sign wants to feel what feels right,
Mm.
and the
Mm.
earth signs are just quite flexible and they just like to talk. So it's like these little ways, these little modalities kind of, yeah, help me guide people, but also myself. Like I so
Mhm.
heavily follow that myself, but equally again, I just want to keep saying it's what feels right. And I think that I say that, but that comes with the knowing of your full self as much as you can, and I think that if you haven't been broken open and had to repair your parts of yourself, I think the version of you that knows themselves is a completely different version, because the ego-led version of me didn't know. She
Mm-mm.
wasn't listening to the signs, she wasn't listening to her intuition, she wasn't um being open to even nature and the seasons, like you've mentioned so many times, that I'm so deeply aware of. I talk about our inner seasons all the time. And yeah, I just think that the more we deepen you know, ourselves, and the knowledge of ourselves is when we find the answers are quite easy, aren't they? They
Yeah,
come to you. Um, More than us searching. But yeah, I feel like I've gone off on a tangent there, but I loved all of it. I loved every part of it. So please tell me about where people can find you, when the album's coming out, and all of those details.
amazing. Well, I was one thing I was just going to say on the end of that was even discussing the difference with the originator Vedic astrology and then Western astrology, like when I found out about that, that it was based off the moon and that it had just had men come in and be like, oh, no, it makes more sense to go off the sun, and how much we lost in just not paying attention to what the originators of that concept were saying. I think that's like the important part that I was trying to say before. Like, I think if you're called to a culture and you don't have a bloodline, I'm not saying don't go and, like have honor and love of that culture and whatever you're drawn to learn to. I think it's just not learning from an actual wisdom keeper and cherry picking that feels
Yeah.
like it's a continuation of the damage of those modalities. So I just wanted to have
Mm.
clarity because I also love going off to other places and dropping in with a culture that has nothing to do with me because there's so much to learn.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah. So basically, the album itself is coming out on Samhain, which is our celebration of Halloween. It's the originator of it. And because in Wicca, you have Sabbats and Esbats for the year. So you might have seen like midsummer celebrations and things like that. They've got one for each turning point within the weather, and it's opposite in Australia. So when we have our like Samhain celebration, there's the opposing like celebration of summer beginning when you're going into winter here. So I was trying to also link both of them around the world, and that one made the most sense because it's also the Witch's New Year. So it comes out on the 31st of October. It's out on all platforms. Fairy Band is the social media that you can find me on, FAERY, and then band. I'm not the best social person, but I will get better.
I love that so much. And I'll pop all the links into the description so anyone can just find it and click, because I'm going to launch this when the album's out. So for everyone, it will be out already. So it's down there. You'll find it. And yeah, I've really loved speaking with you. I feel like you've got such a lovely energy about you. And um, I don't want that to sound basic either. That's not what I'm
Oh, I
trying to
love it.
say.
You
It's
as well.
but I feel like there's that real celestial connection. Like I've really felt that. As soon as you started talking, I felt that real moon energy. So it
Mm,
makes so much sense with everything you've been saying, that I really feel that um within you, like you're embodying that feminine energy,
mm.
that goddess energy. Maybe
Thank-
maybe as well because of Scorpio season, it might be a bit of Hecate or one of the
Oh, I
goddesses
love it.
there.
Yes,
Yeah,
please. Love a bit
coming
of
through, coming through. Oh, I love it all. But to round off, I always do like a little message that I call soul to soul message. And it's kind of you tap into your soul right now and just share what your soul wants this conversation
Mm.
to end with.
Oh, thank you so much for the opportunity to chat with you. You also are a very beautiful human with a wonderful energy. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you.
Um, mm, I think that we're in this time where we're all being given permission, as you're saying, to shine. We're all being given permission to find that special thing that we're sharing. And I think something that's really important in that is that one, we all have an artist inside of us. We all have a very important story to tell. And I think that we have to stop looking at what the outcome of telling those stories is as wanting to get, like numbers and how many likes and did it go viral, and returning to did it help one person? Did that person who was maybe going to end their life hear the thing you were talking about? Did they see your art? Did it enlighten them? Did it make them realize they have more to live for? That for me is the most important thing about sharing art with each other in whatever form it is. And I do believe that everyone has something important to say. Everyone has a moment that's important to allow for them to shine in that particular niche that they've, honed out for themselves. So I just want to encourage everyone who's listening that if you've got something you want to share, share it. Like, do it now. There's no reason to hold back. We get so caught in perfectionism and procrastination when really you might have something that could be said in whatever form you're ready to say it that could help a multitude or just one person. And I really think that's why we're all here now figuring it out together.
Yeah, thank you so much. And actually, that's the whole reason I started this, because of my whole intention was if I just help one person, then I
Mm,
would have fulfilled my mission here on this earth, which, I'm continuing to do. So thank you so much for being here, for the work you do, for the human being you are and the soul that you are. I feel like yeah, you're doing some amazing things in this universe right now. So thank you so
thank
much.
you. You too. It's been such a pleasure.
If this episode resonated with you, please do like, follow, and share with someone that you know would benefit. If you're looking to dive in deeper to becoming your most unapologetic, most authentic, shining self, please do head to my website and join my newsletter, where you'll find out about all of my upcoming events and speaking opportunities and all of the things that I have going on. And also, if you would like to work with me, please do drop me a DM on any of my socials or through my website. Love and light.